by Dr. Eugene Broderick. Eugene at this stage does not need an introduction, but I'm just going to let him speak because today we're looking at, I suppose you could say to a certain extent, the end of the era. The era resigns his Taoiseach in 1959. So thank you all very much, ladies and gentlemen. Dr. Eugene Broderick.
Can everyone hear me clearly? Okay, great. I was asking just two notes to your attention. Tomorrow night at 7:30 there is a talk in the evening series of the museum, and the speaker is Lieutenant Commander Michael Broderick, Officer Commanding the Ellie James Joyce. And he's going to be speaking about the Naval Service and the role of the Naval Service in the rescue of migrants in the Mediterranean. Its attempt to deal with that disaster. He was the liaison officer for the Irish Naval Service with young ladies who were involved at the time. So it should be a most interesting talk. And on Monday, the 4th of November 2019 at 7:30, we have the 8th Dr. Niall Gordon Memorial Lecture. The title is Marshal Marcus William Carr Beresford and the Irish Independence Army. And the speaker is Marcus Delaquare Beresford. Marshal Beresford would have been one of Napoleon's most important commanders. And the speaker will go through his military career. A book is published recently on by the same speakers also. It will be a very interesting talk. So advertising done, okay? I was just observing to Donegal. These talks started just before, sometime in 2016, to mark the 100th anniversary of the 1916 Rising. The idea was to do a few talks in 1916. It then developed because people want to know what happened after, we're done and done. But what strikes me is this: in every single talk, and I think this is about the 25th or 26th so far, De Valera's name has been mentioned in every single one. Every single one. It's quite an extraordinary career by any standards, in terms of length. And we will think it's extraordinary for other reasons. But today will probably mark the end of mentioning De Valera. Any future references are shall we say, are almost horrific. Okay? It was actually on Tuesday the 23rd of June 1959 that Eugene De Valera left broken buildings for the last time as Taoiseach. Now, you will notice De Valera in his office, and in front of him was his own little mini switchboard. Very high tech. Okay? There are lots of switches on it, and he flicks one of those switches and he gets through directly to some minister or other. On that particular day, Tuesday, the 23rd, his private secretary, Andreas Padraig O'Hanlon, came into the Taoiseach's office to tell the Taoiseach his car was waiting for him to take him from broken buildings for the last time. And according to Padraig O'Hanlon, when he entered the office, De Valera was cradling the switchboard. Cradling it. And he turned to Padraig and said to Padraig, it's awful hard to leave go the levers of power. That was not a sentiment shared, I can assure you, by a lot of people in the country at that particular time. And let it also be said, it was also said for the record, many people within Fianna Fáil certainly at this stage were not exactly shedding tears that De Valera was leaving government buildings at this point. He had fought his last election campaign in 1957. And in 1957 he had, as usual, attracted big crowds to all of his meetings. And he was very much the man in command of the situation, speaking to his supporters and his loyal supporters, as he had done throughout his political life. But of course, shortly after he left government buildings, 2 days later, he was inaugurated as the third president of Ireland on the 25th of June 1959. Okay. De Valera, anyway, having led his party to victory in the 1957 election, was at this stage aware of the fact that there were people within Fianna Fáil who were, shall we say, less than enchanted with the fact that he was still around. And for De Valera himself, he must have been reflecting on his political future. Certainly, in 1957, in the autumn of 57, he spoke at the Fianna Fáil Ardèche because there were rumours of his impending resignation, and he felt he really should address this particular matter. He should respond to the rumours. So at the Ardèche, he said a few words to the Fianna Fáil faith. And he announced to them all, as long as this organisation wants me, as long as Dáil Éireann thinks I'm doing my job, my work, I can do it, then I stay. But he did realise, as I said, there were rumours there, and he did realise there was a certain reality facing him. And he continued, I'm quite aware that the years are passing. I know I am hampered considerably by the fact that I cannot read. The day will come when it will be in the interest of the organisation that there shall be a replacement. I want only a hint of the word and I will remember. He was still there 2 years later. I thought the speech was interesting. Note the language used. He says, as long as this organisation wants me, as long as he is in the interest of the organisation. He never mentions the country. Because for De Valera, what was in the interest of Fianna Fáil was in the interest of the country. And what was good for Fianna Fáil was good for the country. It was as simple as that. In De Valera's mind, almost the country and the interest of the country and the interest of Fianna Fáil were identical. That's how De Valera saw it. But the point is this, that he had addressed the unspeakable topic. Now, many of De Valera's colleagues had been told by De Valera, no, shall we say, De Valera had hinted to numbers of his colleagues that he would not be fighting the next general election, whenever that would come. But there were ministers who felt it was time for him to go. But the problem is, to pick the right occasion to give the hint. How do you bring it up? How do you bring up this rather delicate topic? And the opportunity arose. In 1959, Sean T. O'Kelly completed his second term as President of Ireland. There was a vacancy in Áras an Uachtaráin. So, the opportunity presented itself. And ministers suggested to Dave that he could be the Fianna Fáil candidate for the presidency. The presidency would effectively offer De Valera decency of cover to leave public life, shall we say, the politics, the political life. And De Valera agreed, yes, he would go forward as a Fianna Fáil candidate. There was one person, however, who was not impressed by what happened next, who was very unimpressed. And this person was Sean Lemass. Now, Sean Lemass was one of De Valera's most loyal lieutenants, and had great affection and regard for Eamon De Valera. There's a picture of De Valera and Áras an Uachtaráin and Lemass chatting to him. But Lemass was the heir apparent. And at this stage, Lemass felt it was time for De Valera to go. It really was time for De Valera to go. Now, he didn't voice this in public. He was far too loyal to do that. But when De Valera announced that he would be candidate for the presidency, Lemass had expected that De Valera would at that stage step down as Taoiseach. But he didn't. He contested the office of president while still Taoiseach. Now, that really annoyed Lemass. I should have been made Taoiseach as soon as he announced his candidacy. I felt there was a suggestion he was going up for election as president, and if he did not win, he was going to remain on as Taoiseach. There was more than a suggestion. More than a suggestion. That is undoubtedly what De Valera had in mind, insofar as one could read De Valera's mind. De Valera did not confide to ministers, and ministers wouldn't ask him. But Sean Mass thought quite bluntly the prospect of De Valera remaining on as Taoiseach was not a good idea. Probably one of the most loyal of his followers felt De Valera's time was up. And the Mass, when he retired, in a series of conversations which were taped and around archived, made it very clear his feelings. I recognise he had passed the point of no return of being effective as party leader. The whole management of the party was left to me. Dáil business was left to me. He didn't intervene at all. I was concerned with the formulation of economic policy. He didn't intervene. He never asked why you did anything. New ideas did not come from him at all. Actually, that is an appalling indictment of a head of government. It really is an appalling indictment of the head of government. That at this time, Fianna Fáil was in the process of formulating new economic policies. Serious economic policies to address the problem of a country that was on its knees by 1957. And it is quite extraordinary when the Taoiseach, the Mass was Taoiseach at the time, made the observation that while he was working on a major government policy, De Valera said nothing, made no contribution. For many in Fianna Fáil, however, even though De Valera was departing, there was a sense of unease. Won't Fianna Fáil survive without De Valera? He was their greatest vote getter. He was their greatest political asset in many ways. And how would a party survive in the absence of its founder and such a dominant figure? And indeed, let it be said, the same thought was crossing the mind of Eamon De Valera. Would his beloved Fianna Fáil survive in his absence? And what could he do to ensure that Fianna Fáil just might survive? And De Valera decided he would make Fianna Fáil a gift before he left government windows. He would get rid of proportional representation. He would try to get rid of proportional representation. De Valera, by about 1948, was very fed up with PR. He resented the fact that in 1948 he had lost office. And he had lost office to a coalition government. A coalition government made possible by the vagaries of PR. And as far as De Valera was concerned, PR allowed for lots of independence and it allowed for smaller parties. Because what happens in PR is the last count. The last count will be a disaster. Double opinion, indeed, and a cartoon on that. Come back, come back. By some miracle of proportional representation, you've been elected for the 29th count. And this is precisely, and that's the problem. The Dáil was full of guys elected for the 29th count. And De Valera didn't want this. He decided the best thing to do was to get rid of the proportional representation and replace it by the system first past the post. He reckoned that would really help him avoid. But there was a problem. There was a problem in politics, and the problem was this. His constitution, his own constitution, that he brought in 1947, Article 1625 of all things. That was the problem. Article 1625 states, members of Dáil shall be elected on the system of proportional representation by means of a single transferable vote. In other words, he has to get rid of that from the Constitution. There'll have to be a referendum. And that's what De Valera reckoned would have a referendum. And what De Valera reckoned was this. He arranged that the presidential election and the referendum should be on the same day. So that his popularity would sway the electorate into backing the proposal to get rid of proportional representation. So they went off the campaign as president. That was grand. And he won the presidency by 56% of the vote. And he was very pleased with that. Unfortunately, the amendment was defeated. 48% of the electorate voted for it, 52% against. That 48% that voted for the amendment was pretty much the Fianna Fáil core vote. Pretty much, with a few other votes added on. But the non-Fianna Fáil camp clearly voted not to abolish PR. De Valera was rather disappointed, but that was it. He had to accept it, and he headed off to Waterford, where he spent the next 14 years as President of Ireland. And if there was ever an appropriate end to a career, that was the appropriate end. Because the very existence of the office of President of Ireland was due to Eugene de Valera. He had suggested the creation of the office in 1937. So therefore it was entirely fitting that he would go towards the Waterford. Now de Valera knew precisely what to do as president. He had created the office. And de Valera never envisaged that the president should do anything but be nice and quiet and polite. Just do what he's told, shut up. That was very much the case. That was de Valera's thinking. So de Valera went off. And it's got to be said, in the 14 years he served the country as president, he did actually serve the country. He was a dignified and good president. Because that's what we expected presidents to do back then. They didn't do an awful lot, really. Let's be honest. And I think this is, for most of us, the image of de Valera. This is the de Valera most of us remember. A man up in Waterford, sporting his foiler and looking very dignified. Because he did look very dignified. And this is your typical de Valera pose coming out of his Rolls Royce, a ZJ5000, the presidential Rolls Royce, and always looking the part. He was practically blind at this stage. Practically blind. The only hint that he had poor eyesight would be that he was invariably linking his aide-de-camp, an army officer. Otherwise, you mightn't exactly know that his eyesight was that bad. But as I said, he fulfilled the office with great dignity, and he did what one expected a president to do. And I suppose one of the things he did through his term of office is that he welcomed many visitors to the country on behalf of the state. Some nice photographs of him there, very similar to Prince Rainier and Princess Grace of Monaco. Then he visited King Broderick of Belgium, visited in 1968. Now, I have to tell you that I remember King Broderick being here. Now, how anyone could remember King Broderick being here is bizarre. I remember vividly that photograph. King Broderick went up to Waterford, where Jack Lynch, with Ben Peacock, gave him a few hurling lessons. Like that. I think they would have won the hurling. Well, there's Jack hurling, telling him what to do. It was my misfortune in school to be a terrible hurler. Terrible. Abysmal. And I can remember on one particular day, having yet again been undistinguished on the field, coming off the field, and the brother in charge, a nice man, he says, Broderick, he said, come here a minute. And I said, yes, brother. Were you looking at the television when the King of Belgium visited us? And I said, I was. And he was up there getting some hurling lessons from the teacher. And I said, indeed. I reckon Broderick, he held a hurley for 5 minutes. The poor man couldn't hold, he didn't know what to hold. Whether to hold the end of it or the top of it or beside it. He didn't know what to do. But do you know what, Broderick? You know what? When I saw you out on the field, I said to myself, where is King Broderick when you beat him? Born in 1969, Richard Nixon, 1970. It's like a home school. That's 1964 when he went to Washington. But the visit that he's best remembered for was the occasion when he accompanied President Kennedy, who was extremely impressed by David. Extremely impressed. And there they are again. And you notice De Valera, looking the part, he looks very well actually, considering how incapacitated he was at that stage in terms of his eyesight. But it was the funeral of President Kennedy in Washington in 1963. De Valera represented us. There he is. Can you see him there? I haven't got a point. He's there. Right? He walked up the entire thing. And he was very impressive. So that gives us, that's fine. But there is a fact about De Valera is this marks the end of his career. As I said, he's been a topic of conversation here for a long time. And what I want to do now is just venture into the more difficult part of acknowledging the fact that his departure did represent the end of an era. But the question's got to be asked, how does one assess him? The very first thing I think that one needs to be reminded of is sometimes the obvious. It's the sheer length of his career. 57 years in public life. It's quite staggering. Starting in 1916, competent at Bowlan's Mills. 1917, president of Sinn Féin. 18, elected MP for Clare. From 1919 to 21, he was the president of Dáil Éireann. 22 to 26, the leader of anti-treaty Sinn Féin. 26, the founder of Fianna Fáil. From 32 to 73, he served in some form of public office. He was president of the Executive Council, that was the old name for the Taoiseach's office, and Taoiseach, and Foreign Minister from 32 to 48. Opposition leader for 3 years, 48 to 51. Taoiseach 51 to 54. Opposition leader again. Taoiseach then for 2 years. And then President of Ireland for the next 14 years. In many ways, as I was looking at that, I was struck that he almost aged publicly. We saw him from a young man. That was taken in 1920. This was taken shortly before he left office in Ulster. He obviously, as I said, aged in public. His life was such a long political career. And there is one thing that can be said about De Valera, and it is this. He is one of the dominant political figures in Irish history. In many ways, he would rank with O'Connell and Parnell in terms of the extent of his political dominance and in terms of the popularity he enjoyed. And historians would frequently group the three of them together for the purposes of examining this notion of the popularity of a politician. And De Valera's popularity was beyond question. Beyond question. As a political leader. He always attracted large crowds to political meetings throughout his entire political career. He was always the big player for Fianna Fáil. He was always the person who brought the crowds out, irrespective of weather, irrespective of place. He was the person that Fianna Fáil looked to. And his popularity as the Fianna Fáil leader was reflected in a very, very impressive electoral performance. By any standards, whether a De Valera fan or critic is irrelevant here. Objectively speaking, his political performances were terrific. 10 years Fianna Fáil fought. He led Fianna Fáil in 10 general elections. 10 of them. On average, the average vote he got over the 10 years was 46%, which is a good figure for proportional representation. And what's more, sometimes he actually broke beyond 50%, 51.9. That's a staggering vote to get under a PR system. To get a vote of 48.9, 48.3 in 1957. So there we were talking a person who was a terrific vote getter by any standards. So his vocational abilities are impressive and formidable. And among his followers, he commanded an intense loyalty. All of you will know fanatical De Valera supporters. You can say no wrong, you can say no bad for him. He is just terrific. Those who work closest with him also have a deep respect for him. These were his most loyal tenants, Manas, Aiken, McEntee and Wright. And I think what is striking is this. It is the level of loyalty these people displayed, the affection they had for him and the regard they had for him. And I think it's important to say this. These were not two-bit politicians. These were actually very, very powerful politicians. Most of them in their day had fought in 1916. They fought in the War of Independence. They fought in the Civil War. Frank Aiken was the IRA commander during the Civil War. So you're talking about a man who actually was, you know, these were formidable players by any standards. Another person who had great regard for him was McEntee. In a really mushy assessment of De Valera, I firmly believe that our chief was among the best and goodliest of men. I cannot recall one unjust thing he consciously did. Consciously. He was rectitude and integrity personified. And with it all, he was so simple, so human, so merry and full of hope. A human being who was infinitely lovable. Sean McEntee was a political booty boy. Right? He was a Fianna Fáil Rottweiler. You sent him out to tear people up. Right? McEntee was not actually disposed to be mushy or sentimental. So I was struck when I read McEntee's comments about De Valera. Another admirer was Todd Andrews, who became the chairman of Fianna Fáil, CIE. The greatest political figure in Ulster. As a political thinker, he was the superior of Pearse. As a popular leader, he was comparable to Parnell. He was as close to the common man as O'Connell. Now, as far as De Valera's followers was concerned, he was a terrific guy. This fellow, poster in a little election campaign in 1948 says it all. The head of a man whose splendid life story makes your being able to vote for him a proud privilege. Right? And now to Fianna Fáil support. And if you asked the average Fianna Fáil supporter, what did they see in De Valera? What did they see in a man who dominated politics for 57 years? His vision, his charisma, his charm, his intellect, his integrity, his extraordinary ability. That's how they would sum up. He was not your common garden politician. He was extraordinary. And he created a sense of mystique. That's what the De Valera used. De Valera was never one of the boys. You didn't go to De Valera in the house. He didn't go to the Doyle bar. He didn't drink with his TDs. In fact, he told his TDs not to go to the bar. It's not a good place to go to at all. They should go home and do some learn Irish. I'm very happy to that. He projected a sense of confident leadership. A man who could do anything and who knew everything. He could obviously something said about one time, I make no claim to be better than anyone else. I would only say that I have always found my judgment to be better. And love this man to watch our thoughts. It's fair to say that the 1930s were the high point of De Valera's rule. And it was a decade which confirmed his status among his followers. Fianna Fáil in the 30s had an impressive enough record, and particularly in the areas of social reform. Unemployment assistance was increased. Welfare benefits were extended to include small farmers and farm labourers. Widows and pensions, widows and orphans got pensions. And between 32 and 42, In the 10-year period, 132,000 houses were built. 132 houses were built between 1932 and 1940. Okay? Undoubtedly, another achievement of De Valera's government in the 1930s was his dismantling of the treaty settlement. But, just let me observe one thing here. I mentioned his social reforms. De Valera's genius was this. He offered enough social change to please people, but not too much to alarm them. The right balance. He was a genius in that. If he went too far, he'd alarm you. He also began the process in the 30s of disbanding the treaty settlement, which he hated, by amending the Free State Constitution to get rid of parts of that that were repugnant. The oath of allegiance was removed. The reference to the king was removed. The Governor General, who represented the king, was stripped of all his titles. And it was done peacefully. And in 1937, having dismantled the treaty he hated so much, in 1937, he brought in a new constitution. And this is one of De Valera's great achievements. It is one of his great achievements. Because the Constitution of 1937 came to be accepted by all of the political parties. All of them accepted. So the tensions caused by the constitutional divisions of the 30s were resolved. And the country settled down under De Valera's constitutional dispensation. And I think there's one thing that must be acknowledged, and it is this. It is when he brought the Constitution in. In the 1930s, Europe was falling under the sway of dictatorships. There is Europe, 1925. The pink areas are dictatorships. Look at Europe by 39. A number of countries that were ruled by dictators. When the Dáil was debating the Constitution in 1937, Poland, Lithuania, Yugoslavia, Austria, Estonia, Germany, Bulgaria, Latvia, Greece, Italy, and Spain were all under dictatorial rule. Yet it was during this particular time that De Valera brought in a constitution with all its failings and with all it may say about it, but there is no hint of dictatorship in it. It's a democratic document. And that document was put before the people in a plebiscite. And the people of Ireland enacted the Constitution themselves. And I think that was a great achievement of De Valera. And I will say, and I believe this very strongly, at a time when democracy was being denied in so many of Europe's citizens, the Irish people were represented in a plebiscite with a constitution founded on the principles of democratic government, fundamental rights, the state's obligation to vindicate these rights, and popular sovereignty. Popular sovereignty was the people are in charge. It was one of the finer moments in the history of independent Ireland. And I think De Valera must get great credit for that. However, it must also be acknowledged that De Valera was and still is a deeply divisive figure. If he had passionate followers, he had equally passionate critics. And the root of the animosity towards De Valera goes back to the treaty time, the split over the treaty. And of all times in De Valera's life, this is and always has been the most contentious, the most controversial. De Valera did not go to London to negotiate the treaty. Some would say he made a massive miscalculation. He thought he could control events from Dublin. He wasn't able to do so. When the delegates signed, he was extremely annoyed. How does one assess that? I am inclined to agree with the assessment, one of the most recent assessments of De Valera by Roland Fanning, a very distinguished historian. De Valera opposed the treaty not because it was a compromise, but because it was not his compromise. Not that it is a compromise that had been authorized by him in a dance out in society. And De Valera's behaviour after that does give rise for a lot of criticism. He rejected the legitimacy of the Dáil vote, the majority Dáil vote. He made a number of very intemperate speeches during the time after the Dáil had ratified the treaty. His attitudes and his comments played into the hands of extremists. Now, the extremists were not being led by De Valera, but De Valera certainly, shall we say, made it easier for them. So at the end of the day, I think it is wrong to say that De Valera deserves all the responsibility for the war. The IRA men would have done what they did anyway. But his behaviour at the time certainly contributed to the Civil War situation. And at this time of great national crisis, De Valera was extremely, extremely indecisive and unsure. And De Valera, throughout his entire political life, was very sensitive about the period 22 to about 29. Very sensitive about that. He felt that he had to keep explaining himself. He had to keep justifying himself. And I'm always struck that his sensitivity about that period would suggest it doesn't rest comfortably with him. His behaviour did not rest comfortably with him at all. Throughout his public life, he was preoccupied by the verdict of history, especially his role between 1916 and 23. He was anxious to justify his actions and to counter the criticisms of many people. From early on, he displayed what Professor Roy Foster has called a neurotic obsession with controlling the official versions of events in which he played a part. Very early on, in the 1930s, he recruited a man called Frank Packin to write a book, Peace by Ordeal, that gave his account of the treaty. Then in 1970, an authorised biography was brought out. That was towards the end of his political career. The authorised biography is most interesting in terms of the structural book. 1916 to 24, 8 years, 203 pages. 24 to 39, 109 pages. 39 to 45, 78 pages. 45 to 70, 35 pages. 42% of the text of the entire book covers the period 16 to 24. He ignored most of his political career after that. Suggests to me a man very sensitive about things. Very sensitive. If that was the lowest point of his career, the second lowest point would have to be towards the end of his career, 1950s. The final years of De Valera's participation in political life were in many respects the most distressful years Irish society experienced since the 1880s. That's the assessment of Professor Joe Lee. And what is disconcerting is, during those years, it is hard to find any contribution he made to addressing the issues, the problems facing it. The country was in economic and social crisis, and as political leader had nothing to offer. And that is, shall we say, another serious comment. There were very serious economic and related social problems. He did not have the answers. When he departed politics in 1959, he left Irish society pretty much the way he found it. There were economic and social improvements, but society essentially remained virtually unchanged. Dev, like many in early Sinn Féin, had really no profound economic or social vision. Early Sinn Féin argued the solution to all Ireland's problems is get the Brits out. When the Brits are gone, our problems are solved. When the British left, the problems weren't solved. But there wasn't a profound social vision there. De Valera, throughout his political career, and I've read a lot of his speeches, you will never find De Valera passionate about righting social wrongs. you will find that he was very conservative in economic and social matters. He did not have strong thoughts on those. But, and this is very important, at no stage through his political career did Eamon de Valera ever pretend that he was going to bring about profound social change or profound economic change. He never, ever presented himself on that basis. Never suggested he would do that. Rather, he suggested and he conveyed the fact that he was, at the end of the day, an economic and social conservative. And that's what people voted for. De Valera's people, the people who were going to vote for De Valera, voted for this type of man. They knew that's what they were getting. He reflected the values of the Irish people. An essentially conservative leader, he was elected by an essentially conservative people. He was a brilliant politician in securing the votes of so many, and this he did by reflecting their concerns. He reflected the dominant social values, and these were conservative values, that prevailed in the Ireland of his time. He never challenged them because he accepted them, and because most of the people who voted for him were economically and socially conservative. They were his values, they were their values. So what he did is this. By reflecting these values, he helped to reinforce them. And his political dominance ensured the prevalence of economic and social conservatism. So, when you criticise a politician, just be careful that you do not criticise him for being something he never claimed to be. He never, ever claimed to be a social or economic reformer. That was never De Valera's platform. He accepted a measure of social change and social reform. Yes, he did. But beyond a certain point, that was it. And it is fair to say that the Ireland of De Valera was a conservative one. And in many ways, the relationship between the state and the Catholic Church is often seen as giving expression to this conservatism. For many people looking back at the Ireland which De Valera governed, and in particular the Ireland of the 1950s, it was a grim time. It would appear that the relationship between church and state shaped and determined this gloominess. And one of the pictures you'll see of De Valera many times is, there we are, with Archbishop Broderick, Archbishop of Dublin in the 1930s, with Archbishop McQuaid. And it were to be two people who become the demons of the 50s and the 60s. Here they are, the two demonic figures. They represent all that was wrong with Ireland in the 1950s. Church and state. An ungodly alliance between both of them. Ungodly alliance. Well, probably wrong words to use. Okay? And there's De Valera again with Cardinal Dalton of Armagh. And then there is with the Archbishop of New York, Archbishop Hayes. Cardinal Hayes. Now, De Valera loved the company of clerics. He loved the company of clerics. De Valera was almost like a cleric himself. Very abstemious in drink, very serious, and such like. There were members of his cabinet for whom a good day out was a good hurling match. An All-Ireland final and something exciting. For De Valera, a good Sunday was the ordination of a bishop. He would love going to Episcopal consecrations. He loved meeting bishops. De Valera was not in the least bit intimidated by clergy. He held his own. No difficulty there. No difficulty. It is fair to say that De Valera was a conservative. He was a convinced and practicing Catholic. But was he too close to the Catholic Church? Was he too close to the extent that he just did the Church's bidding? Religion was important to him, and he accepted the teachings of his church. Therefore, matters of faith and morals, he was a faithful, orthodox Catholic. He had no difficulty at all in enshrining the values of the church in law, such as no divorce, no contraception, no abortion. He accepted the primacy of the church's role in health and education provision. Why? Because that essentially reflected the views of the vast majority of the electorate. Do not for 1 minute imagine that De Valera was like King Canute, holding back a liberal wave. I want to let you know there was no liberal wave in the 1950s. Right? There was no one out there screaming for abortion, divorce, and contraception in the 1950s. It wasn't happening. So De Valera wasn't somehow there with championing of conservatism against liberalism. There was no liberalism. What needs to be done here is this. I'll be finishing on this point. It is essential, I think, to understand the nature of the relationship between church and state in Ireland. Now, it's something that torments me. I have read on this topic more than anything else, trying to understand what is the dynamic between church and state, especially in the light of, we say, so many of the things that have now come up. Mother and child homes, industrial schools, all of those things. What exactly was the nature of the relationship? Because it goes to the very heart. It goes to the very heart of many things. I think most of us have this illusion of politicians afraid of bishops and croziers. I know who he is, but he's got a crozier. Okay, that's what he said. And this notion of bishops would go around ready to swipe with their crozier. That's not the case. That's not the case. Bishops actually didn't swipe their crozier that much at all. In fact, when they did swipe with their crozier, it became unusual. That's why the mother and child scheme was so unusual. How came the croziers? No, I mean, they needed to be allowed at all. There was no need. There was never any need to do that. Why was this the case? Very simple. Because the vast majority of politicians and senior civil servants were infused with the core moral and ethical values of Catholicism. They were educated in schools controlled by the church. They went to church every Sunday. Therefore, there existed, at the very highest levels of state, what has been called the politics of informal consensus. By this is meant that Catholic politicians and senior civil servants and administrators accepted Catholic social and moral teachings. It was their default position. Bishops did not need to take out the crozier because bishops, clerics, politicians, civil servants were on the same wavelength. They were all educated in the same schools. Belts of the crozier were therefore very rare. This notion of this consensus may seem to be a very unexciting explanation of what was going on. I mean, belt of the crozier is so exciting. This is very benign. It is not benign at all. I actually think that consensus at the very top of the state was utterly corrosive. Utterly corrosive. It's not what was done, it's what wasn't done. Because if you have a consensus at the top, ideas aren't advanced. Why? They're going to be shot down. They're going to be knocked. And what is striking is the absence of any radical ideas at all. Because they wouldn't get past the starting post. Because the consensus would ensure that they were not. And this consensus was so stifled. It stifled new ideas. It shut down discussion when it conflicted with the consensus. The consensus, therefore, never permitted serious questioning of the way things were done. The church controlled schools, it knows best for education. In one of its manifestations, this politics of consensus becomes very simply, don't rock the boat. Don't ask awkward questions. And in a particular situation, it meant that civil servants in the Department of Education managing industrial schools didn't ask questions. Nobody asked questions. And when ideas were presented as to how industrial schools could be run differently, as happened by some civil servants with some civil servants in the Department of Finance, those files got buried. The ideas were never discussed because it conflicted with the relationship between church and state at the highest level. De Valera was an important pillar of this consensus. He was part of the system, like so many politicians and civil servants. He never questioned Catholic, moral and social teachings were part of his mental DNA, as they were part of the mental DNA of most politicians, most voters, and most people who administered various parts of the state. And I think that, to me, explains so much of what went on, and why, instead of big dramas and big hiatuses and all that, there's quietness. And there's a remarkable calm in Irish administration, health, education, welfare, from 22 on. Why? They're all on the same page. Simple as that. They're all on the same page. Finally, I'll just bring this to a conclusion. It would, however, be wrong to suggest that De Valera was in the church's pocket. I don't accept that. When the church strayed into purely political areas, it got its answer from De Valera. When the church wanted De Valera to acknowledge and recognize the Spanish General Franco and his intent to overthrow the Republic in Spain, and to intervene, to allow Irishmen to go to fight, De Valera said no, absolutely no. But the church said, he's fighting against communists. We have got to support Franco. De Valera's answer was, no, this is a political issue. This is a political issue. But out. When Mussolini invaded Abyssinia, the sanctions were introduced by the League of Nations. A lot of bishops were outraged. Mussolini is a good Catholic. He's invaded Ethiopia. So what are they out there? What religion are the Ethiopians? I mean, you cannot be serious. A good Catholic man living in Italy attacked some old place, and you're supporting sanctions against it. De Valera said, sorry, it's a League of Nations decision. Vote out. Vote out. None of your business. Finally, let me just say that a very controversial figure, very difficult to sum up, very difficult to do so in a short time. I gather as much as I put in. You could, I can horrify you by telling you, you could give all day. Which cruel and unusual punishment. Right? But maybe this might serve as a summary of a man who's been spoken of here so often. A very popular political leader, the most successful politician in his generation. A deeply divisive figure. During his long career, he advanced the cause of Irish sovereignty and some measures of social reform. But he was essentially concerned with social and economic matters, reflecting his own values and those who voted for him. His career was much too long. During the last 10 years of his political life, he had little, if anything, to offer, and this at a time of deep national, economic and social crisis. So, controversial. Final thing I will say is this. The famous De Valera quotation.
Yeah.
It is my considered opinion that in the fullness of time, history will record the greatest columns and will record with minds. Very dramatic stuff. Especially after a film. And the Michael Collins film, this quotation became very popular. Great stuff. No, I wouldn't think much of the quotation, to be honest with you. Actually, the truth of the matter, as I see it, is this. De Valera has become a largely forgotten figure. Interestingly, when most Fianna Fáil TDs were polled relatively recently on the person they admired most as an inspirational figure in politics, not one of them mentioned David in there. Not one of them mentioned David. They all mentioned Sean in Mass. And hanging in the Taoiseach's office, when a person becomes Taoiseach, they often hang a portrait in the office. Hanging in Leo Varadkar's office is a portrait of Sean in Mass. Right? And that, I think, is the thing. In the fullness of time, history will record not so much Michael Collins, but the achievements of Sean Lemass. Because Sean Lemass's vision was fundamentally different to De Valera's in many ways. Not in all ways, but in many ways. And the thing about it is, it was Lemass that started the process that eventually led to the Ireland that completely obscured De Valera's vision. And the Ireland of Eamon De Valera is now largely forgotten. The only thing we have from the Ireland of Eamon De Valera is his constitution in 1947. Apart from that, that's it. So he went off towards an Run, spent 14 years up there, and then just before he left office, however, there occurred a very unusual event. A real little insight into Ireland in the 1950s. The famous boycott at Fethel-on-Sea in 1957, which gives a wonderful insight into many things that happened in Ireland. A great story. I hope I can do justice next week, but it's a great story. So next week, we're in Fethel-on-Sea.
Thank you, Eugene. We hope to see you all back here this time next week, episode 4 goes.
Sorry, apologies.